tell me, at what point did you come into this story? Had it been going for quite a while, or because I
Uh,
find, where do you tell these people start taking footage of everything, we need it? Where was
yeah,
your place in it?
well, I didn't begin my film until after Opportunity had died. So, in 2019, this tweet went viral, and it was Opportunity's last communication with Earth, and it went viral, I think, because it was like a global gut punch to people that this little robot owned millions of miles away was in trouble. And I'm a huge space enthusiast, so I was following the mission, and I remember that happening. And then she died a few months later. And that's when we began the film. So NASA had been documenting her entire mission all the way back to the late 90s when she was just, an idea in someone's head, all the way through her death in 2019. But they had almost 1,000 hours of footage that they gave
Wow.
to us that we then used to make the film.
Yeah, I would be freaked if I came in after it kind of had ended, and then you go, how do we get the footage from those early years?
Yeah. Well, the idea from the beginning, I partnered with Amblin Entertainment, which is Steven Spielberg's company. And the idea from the beginning was like, if we're gonna make a doc about this, let's take the audience to Mars. Let's create a photoreal Mars, which had virtually never been done before, and let's make the audience feel like they're there with these robots on this adventure. And so we partnered with Industrial Light and Magic, which is George Lucas's company, to create that world. So even though her story had ended, we wanted it to unfold in present tense, And Angela Bassett in our film, who reads what are called the rover diaries, those were play-by-play accounts that were written by NASA every day of what the robots were going through. And so getting access to those really allowed us to keep the film in present tense. So we had the archive, we had the visual effects on Mars, and then we also had this diary which kept you in the moment so that, I think most people will probably enter the film knowing the robot isn't alive anymore, but we didn't want people to have that feeling
Spoiler
from.
alert, right? One of
Yeah.
those things. Well, how was it working with special effects? How, because that's probably something you never ever do in a documentary, and this is.
Yeah. I've done animation in my docs before, but never visual effects to this scope for sure. And I mean, it was incredibly fun, and it was incredibly, as an artist, it was incredibly freeing to have that type of innovation. This whole mission, this whole story was about innovation and technology. And so I think to tell that story as a filmmaker, we needed to bring that element of innovation to the film itself. So it was definitely a steep learning curve, but a very fun one. And getting to work with the geniuses at Industrial Light and Magic. I'm actually in San Francisco right now because I have a screening with them tonight in their theater here. I was like a kid in a candy store getting to watch my vision come to life because all of these incredible artists at their computers creating, all of that Mars is not from their imaginations. It's based on the photography. Each of the robots had 9 cameras. There's 2 orbiters above Mars that take photos down on Mars of the robots' journeys. So we had all of this photography and all of the data from NASA, like the weather on every day of a certain, whether it's Opportunity getting stuck in quicksand. Like we were able to go to those soul numbers and say like, okay, well, this was the level of dust in the air during those days. This was the temperature. This was the weather. ILM, here's all that information, light the scene in that way. So although they're big visual effects, they are very rooted in fact and truth, and it's kind of like a documentary way of doing visual effects.
So you have all of these kind of science nerds there at your disposal. How do you get them to be enthusiastic?
That wasn't very hard. I thought it was going to be hard. I thought it was going to be probably the biggest challenge. I think I just assumed that scientists and engineers would probably be unemotional, pretty detached people. And once we started having conversations with these people, I think it was therapeutic for them in a lot of ways because the mission had just ended and they hadn't talked about it in a while, and, they move on very fast. It's not like it's not like getting the time to grieve a person where you can take some time off. They are many had already moved on to other missions even while Opportunity, was still alive, and so I think having the opportunity to talk about this mission and her life and what it was like to work together was, cathartic in a way for them, and so they all were just wearing their hearts on their sleeves in these conversations, which made my job a lot easier.
Did you do the interviews and then write the script, or how did you craft it?
We did, that's a good question. We didn't do interviews on camera, but what we do in my world, we call them pre-interviews. And we began the film in March of 2020. So it was like the very beginning of COVID. So we couldn't interview these people on camera anyway because it was COVID and NASA had very strict COVID protocols. Uh, so we didn't even begin our interviews until late 2020, but we did pre-interviews on Zoom, with people, and we used those pre-interviews. I mean, they were hours long and we did almost 4 dozen of them. So it was a lot of people, it was a lot of hours, and I watched all of those and used those to write the screenplay. And then, like, because it takes years to do visual effects, we needed to start the ball rolling even before we had done any interviews on camera.
So how do you give Oppie and Spirit the kind of personality that I think comes across in all of this, where you go, oh my God, they're a character. They're
Yeah.
you're how do you do that? And how do you make sure that it isn't just, oh, it's just another machine we're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that they are characters, but we weren't able to make them characters in the way you can make Wally a character, R2D2, because these are these are real things and they're very limited in what they actually do. Like they don't have a lot of mechanisms. You can't put eyebrows on them to show emotion or so we were pretty limited in how we did that. They have eyes, which are their cameras. So we really worked on using the mechanisms of the eyes and how they take pictures to be a way of being expressive. Their heads move up and down. They go to sleep. Their head bows when they go to sleep or when their battery's running out. But yeah, we had to really let the human beings be the ones that humanize them. And luckily they do. I mean, they totally saw these robots as having very distinct personalities, different people related with different ones. Opportunity was always kind of seen as like the A-star student, and Spirit was seen more as like the rough and tumble, blue collar rover. And I think people relate to one or the other or both. But that's really where we were able to draw their personalities, was the way that the humans described them.
How many songs were on the playlist?
I mean, over the course of their missions, it's hundreds, if not thousands.
Did they
In our
repeat, or were
uh,
they always different?
I think they were always different. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there might have been a couple repeats, and there were different songs for Spirit and Opportunity. So I don't know if there were repeats between the two of them, because the songs were always chosen because the lyrics usually of the song, or sometimes the title of the song, was relevant to whatever the robot was going through. So there were thousands to choose from. I think we have, 7 in the film, and it was incredibly hard to choose what those 7 would be, because we had thousands of songs at our disposal to choose from.
Were rights a problem? Do you say we can't use that song because we can't get the rights for it, or was it?
It's interesting because I had made a Beatles film before, and I've gone through this process, and I made that film almost 10 years ago. And at that time, the Beatles had virtually never been used in film or television, at least in many decades. And we got permission for that documentary, which was a little film about the Beatles secretary. And so I knew how hard that was to get permission to use Beatles music. And our music supervisor on Night Oppy said, like, just so you know, the second hardest band to license is ABBA, which was a key song in our film as well. So we knew it was an uphill battle, but I mean, I'm sure my music supervisor would say it wasn't that easy, Ryan, but it was shockingly easy to line up all of these rights. I think it's very different when you're going to a record label and you're saying like, "Hey, we'd like to use your Beatles song as soundtrack." Um, that's one thing. It's very different when you can go to a record label and say, "Your band's song was used to wake up a robot on another planet," or "Your song was used when a robot wasn't waking up because she was in crisis and people were mourning her." I think it makes people listen and it does something to people's hearts. And I would imagine, I mean, all the bands said yes. We didn't get any no's. There's not like any songs that we got a no to that we couldn't include in the film. And I think it's just something special about how their music was used.
Yeah. Oh, it, the music is a big part of your film.
Yeah.
And it really, it helps sells. Like I say, something that you go, oh, I'm not going to watch this. This is a bunch of nerds sitting around talking about, a rover,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
And then you get so caught up in it that at the end, you don't want to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Was that
Well,
a problem for you to say goodbye to this project and say, I'm done with it? Or do you go,
no, 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 no. It's always hard for me to separate from my projects, and you never really do. It's like we always joke that they're like children that like won't ever leave home. Even my first film, I still have to, I'm a parent to
sure.
all the time. And so, but yeah, it's always painful. I mean, my favorite movie as a little kid was E.T. And I
Mhm.
remember when this idea was pitched to me from Amblin, having this conversation where like it's such a similar narrative trajectory to E.T. It's a film about wonder and awe, but it's also about the connection between a human and a non-human. And if we do our jobs right, the audience will fall in love with this robot, and that robot will have to be we'll have to say goodbye to her at the end of the film, just like Elliot says goodbye to ET. And so I knew it was going to be a film full of hope, but that it would also have quite a sad ending. And finishing the film was like that too, like having to say goodbye to a project. I've never made a film that was so fun to work on, that was so joyful and so full of heart. As documentary filmmakers, we're almost always covering very heavy subject matters. That's the types of stories that demand to be told, is covering problems or things that need solutions. And this one was just such a reprieve from my normal day-to-day job, that it's hard to move on and know that I'm diving back into films that are really heavy and will not bring that type of joy day to day, but are still, important stories that need to be told.
Did you talk to Steven Spielberg at all during the course of this or not?
Yeah, I mean, not on the phone, but we got notes from him, and he, I mean, we had two Amblin executives named Daryl Frank and Justin Falvey, and they're the execs on this film, and they're the ones who share the projects with Spielberg. And the feedback that we got from him was wonderful. It was, I think he's a director and he knows how to give notes to other directors, and it wasn't like he gave notes near the end, so it was more feedback on the film, but he was very, very pleased with it. It made him
He
cry.
didn't say, it looks a little bit like my ET here. You better watch this, right? One of those things.
Yeah, well, we often get told that our robots look like Wall-E, and NASA's very, very careful to remind everyone that they created these robots first and Wall-E
Before.
came second. So if anyone's based on anyone else, it's Wall-E was based on Oppy.
That's right. Last question is, why did you pick Angela Bassett? Why was she the one to do the narration?
Because I wanted, so like I said, we found those rover diaries and they were written in present tense. And so, I don't even call it narration, what Angela's doing in my film, because narration I see as, telling the audience what's happening as sort of an omniscient third party, um, objective voice. And Angela, I see as like she's playing a role, and that role is the voice of NASA. These are actually we didn't write her words. Those are words that NASA wrote every day. A human being would type that up at the end of every day. And so I wanted an actor to play a role, and Angela's was always the voice I had in my head. You know, for years when we were making this film, the voice that was in our rough cuts was our production assistant, James. He would read the Rover Diaries and my editors would cut it in. And James has a really beautiful, provocative voice as well. But eventually he was replaced with
Ah,
Angela. No offense to James. He was replaced with Angela, and getting to record with her was one of, you know, the best days of my filmmaking career. She's just such an incredible actor, so empathetic, which is what I wanted in her voice, something so maternal and like a caretaker. And so we wanted that sort of tone, thing that's incredibly sensitive and empathetic. And she just took the film to a whole other level once we got to layer in her voice.
well, it's like I say, it's one of those things that you think, oh, I'm not going to like this at all. And
Yeah, I
then
keep hearing
I'm
that.
sorry to tell you that from the get-go, but once you watch it and you see the things that unfold, you become so caught up in their day-to-day activities that you think, I guess I could work at NASA and I could watch this all the time. You know,
Yeah, no,
it's
I don't
fascinating.
take any offense to that. I keep hearing that after film festivals. I actually find that the biggest compliment because, you know, I understand, like, unless you're a space enthusiast, you do not want to see this film. I think it's going to be one of our biggest challenges is filling seats and doing it. We'll go in with an open mind and go along for the journey.
Well, great, good luck with it. I hope it's a huge, huge hit for you. I think
Thank you.
it's one of those things that you don't see it as a documentary, you see it as a film.
Yeah, well, I hope that, yeah, I hope through word of mouth it spreads in that way. Thank you for writing about it.
I'll be loud. I'll be
Okay.
talking a lot, okay?
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank
It
you
was
so
nice to meet
much. Have a
you.
great one.
Take care.